The city had been holding its breath for 3 days, and on the fourth, it finally exhaled snow. It came down in sheets that morning, the kind of heavy, suffocating snowfall that muffled sound and softened the hard edges of Midtown into something almost gentle. Almost, the office towers still cut upward through the white sky with their customary indifference. The traffic still ground forward with the mechanical patience of a city that had been inconvenienced by weather 10,000 times and had never once stopped for it. Caleb Marsh arrived at the corner of 5th and Hargrove at 6:47 every morning. Not 6:45. Not 6:50. 6:47, because that was when the coffee urns finished cycling and the first batch was genuinely hot, and because that was when the early shift employees of Hargrove Capital Management began arriving, and because a hot cup in a cold hand was the closest thing to an argument Caleb had ever been able to make. He set up his cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who had stopped feeling embarrassed about what he did for a living and had arrived, somewhere on the far side of that embarrassment, at something quieter and more durable. He fastened the canopy, checked the seal on the urns, arranged the cups in their sleeve of 40, tucked a hand warmer into each coat pocket, and exhaled a small white cloud into the 7-degree air. His name was Caleb Marsh, 34 years old. 5 years ago, he had been the director of product development at a mid-sized fintech firm in Boston, pulling a salary that had seemed, at the time, like proof that the decisions he'd made were the right ones. Then his wife, Rachel, had gotten sick, then sicker. Then she had died on a Tuesday in November. And the thing that Caleb had discovered about grief, the true, specific, biological fact of it, was that it made certain kinds of ambition feel like a language you no longer spoke. He had tried to keep working. He had tried very hard. And then one morning he had simply not been able to get on the train. He had moved to New York to be closer to Rachel's sister, who helped with his daughter, Nora, now 7. He had found the coffee cart through a friend of a friend. He had found that standing outside in the cold, doing a concrete task with his hands, pressing hot cups into the palms of cold strangers, was the only work that did not make the grief worse. He had been doing it for 3 years. He did not think of it as failing. Most days, the first customers came at 6:58, 2 young analysts who worked on the 16th floor and who always ordered the same thing and always, without fail, looked slightly startled to find him already there, as though they expected the cart to materialize from the snowfall, rather than having been carried there and assembled by a human being. Large dark roast, no sugar, one said. Large dark roast, no sugar, Caleb said, and handed it across. At 7:14, he saw her coming from half a block away. He always did. Her name, the name everyone on the street knew, because names like hers traveled down the block on the lips of assistants and junior associates the way weather moved, was Sloan Whitfield. 38. Chief Executive Officer of Hargrove Capital Management, a position she had occupied for 4 years following a hostile-ish removal of the founder's son, the particulars of which had been covered in 3 separate financial publications and which had cemented her reputation as someone whose competence was rivaled only by her willingness to use it. She walked the way people walked when they had learned, early and thoroughly, that the world moved out of the way for certain kinds of certainty. Her coat was charcoal cashmere, her scarf was deep burgundy, and she wore her dark blonde hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and was almost certainly not. She did not look at the sidewalk. She looked straight ahead, and the snow, for its part, seemed to fall around her rather than on her. She walked past Caleb's cart every morning. She had never bought anything. What she did, instead, and she did it with such consistency that Caleb had eventually accepted it as a structural feature of his morning. Like the cold, or the traffic, was to say something. Not always the same thing. Sometimes it was directed at the 2 young analysts, who would stiffen almost imperceptibly at her approach. Sometimes it was directed at the doorman 2 feet beyond Caleb's cart, as though the cart did not exist, and Caleb did not exist, and the entire structure had been placed there specifically to illustrate the distance between the kind of person who owned a building and the kind of person who stood outside it. But sometimes, more often than Caleb had begun to like it, was directed at him. The first time had been 2.5 years ago, on a morning much like this one. She had looked at his cart with the specific expression of someone who had grown up knowing the price of everything, and had developed strong opinions about what that said about the people selling it. "You know they have a cafe upstairs," she had said. "Real espresso," Caleb had smiled. It was the smile he had developed for exactly this type of comment, polite, opaque, containing nothing that could be used against him. "I'm sure they do," he had said. She had gone inside. He had stood in the cold. That had been the beginning. By the time the first snowfall of December arrived, Caleb Marsh had been publicly condescended to by Sloane Whitfield 31 times in 26 months. He had kept count, not out of bitterness or not only but because counting things was a habit from his old life that he had never quite lost, and the number had a kind of dark comedy to it that he had learned to appreciate. She had called his coffee fuel for people who don't know what coffee is. She had, on one occasion, dropped a $20 bill in front of his cart rather than into his hand, and when he had bent to pick it up and realized she had not actually purchased anything, had said, "Keep it," with the particular inflection of someone doing a thing they believed was kind. She had told a junior associate, within Caleb's earshot, and apparently without concern about whether he could hear, that the cart is a liability risk. Someone should talk to building management. There had been a morning in March gray sky, the last wet snow of the season coming down in heavy clumps, when she had emerged from a black car with 3 other executives and had gestured at the cart as though it were an illustration of something, saying, "This is what I mean about the block presentation," and then continued walking without looking at Caleb directly. Being used as scenery required a particular kind of patience. There had been a morning in July when an out-of-town analyst, clearly trying to make an impression during a site visit, had purchased coffees for the small group surrounding him, including one for Sloane, and she had accepted it, looked at it, and set it on the ledge beside the entrance door without drinking it, just left it there, condensation forming on the outside in the July heat. While she discussed something with the group, it was possible this had nothing to do with Caleb. He had logged it in the column anyway, with a margin note that read, "Possibly atmospheric, not conclusive." He was a fair accountant, even of things that hurt him. The building management had not talked to Caleb. The cart remained. Caleb remained. He was very good at not reacting. He had gotten good at this, partly through temperament, and partly through the specific discipline of grief, which made most external provocations feel, by comparison, very small. Not painless, just small. He had gotten good at this, the way people got good at anything painful through repetition, through the specific fatigue that comes from feeling something enough times that the feeling stops arriving with full force and starts arriving as a kind of familiar ache. His daughter, Nora, had seen it once. She came to the cart on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, because her aunt dropped her at the nearby library, and Caleb picked her up on his way home. She was 7, small for her age, with Rachel's dark eyes and Caleb's tendency to watch things carefully before deciding what she thought about them. She had been at the cart the day Sloane dropped the $20. After Sloane had gone inside, Nora had said, "She's not very nice. She's having a hard morning," Caleb had said. Nora had looked at him with the expression of someone who had not yet learned to accept this kind of explanation. She looked like she was having a fine morning. She looked like she was having a great morning. Actually, she just wasn't being nice to you. "You're right," Caleb had said. "She wasn't. So why did you say it was her morning?" He had thought about this. "Because it cost me less to think that," he had said. Nora had considered this seriously. The way she considered everything. "I don't think that's how it's supposed to work," she had said. He had handed her a hot chocolate. "Neither do I, really." What Caleb had never said to anyone, not to Nora, not to his sister-in-law Denise, not to his one real friend in the city, a man named Patrick Webb, who ran the food cart 2 blocks north, was that he recognized Sloane Whitfield. Not from the financial press, not from the building. From somewhere else entirely. He recognized her, specifically, from a photograph he had seen 11 years ago in the common room of a Salvation Army shelter in Providence, Rhode Island, where he had spent a formative 6 months volunteering during his last year of business school. The photograph had been taken at a fundraiser for the shelter's winter coat drive. In it, a young woman, maybe 27, wearing donated clothes that were 2 sizes too large, and a smile that was working very hard, was holding up a children's coat for the camera. The caption had read, "Victoria Sloan, shelter resident and coat drive volunteer." Victoria Sloan. She had changed her name to Sloan Whitfield. Somewhere between Providence and here. The hair was different. The body had the particular stillness of someone who had trained themselves out of certain postures. But the angle of the jaw was the same, the set of the eyes. Caleb Marsh knew what it meant to rebuild yourself from nothing. And he recognized it in other people the way you recognized the grammar of a language you had once spoken fluently, even when the words were different. He had never said anything. He had told himself this was because it was none of his business, and this was true. He had told himself it was because she would find it condescending, and this was probably true. He had told himself it was not his story to tell, and this was absolutely true. He had not told himself the real reason, which was that he was curious about what she was building, and he was not ready to disrupt the experiment. On the morning of December 12th, the financial news that greeted the early shift analysts as they queued for coffee was not good. Caleb knew this because he listened. He had always listened. Standing behind a coffee cart with a steady stream of people who were venting stress sideways at each other was an education in the specifics of several industries, and the specific anxiety of Hargrove Capital's lower floors that morning was unmistakable clipped sentences, phones checked and rechecked, a particular quality of silence between 2 analysts who were normally loud. "She know yet?" one of them said. "Somebody's briefing her at 8. Meridian's been buying since September. It's a full position." The name Meridian appeared twice more before Caleb stopped tracking it. Meridian, he knew because he had not stopped reading the financial press simply because he had stopped working in it, was a private equity vehicle operated through a holding company called Bridgefield Partners. It was aggressive, patient, and deeply private. In 3 years it had taken positions in 4 companies and had, in 3 of those cases, forced leadership transitions within 18 months. The 4th company was still being watched. Caleb poured coffee, made change, said good morning 14 times, and did not think about any of this. He was very good at not thinking about things. At 7:22, Sloan Whitfield came down the block. She walked the same way she always walked, but Caleb, who was good at watching, saw the difference. The coat was the same. The scarf was the same, but there was a quality to her forward motion that was slightly more controlled than usual. Not tight exactly, but curated, the way people held themselves when they were using the act of walking to keep something else from happening. She reached the cart. She looked at him. "The dark roast is terrible," she said. "I had it once, 2 years ago. Someone on my floor brought it up as a joke. Then they wasted $350, Caleb said. Something shifted in her face, not a smile exactly, but the preliminary motion of a smile that had been redirected. She looked at him with a different quality of attention than she usually employed. "You don't care at all, do you?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I care that it's hot," Caleb said. "Everything else is negotiable." She stood there for a moment. The snow was coming down again, lighter now. More like static than weather. A long black car idled at the curb. "Large dark roast," she said. "No sugar." He poured it. He handed it to her. Their fingers did not touch. He was careful about this. Had learned early that certain kinds of carelessness created problems he wasn't interested in navigating, but he was close enough to see, when she wrapped both hands around the cup, that her knuckles were white. She went inside. Patrick Webb appeared at his elbow at 8:15, the way Patrick appeared everywhere without announcement, with coffee of his own from his own cart, with the expression of a man who had decided long ago that the best use of the first hour of any day was finding out what was happening in the world. "Hargrove's in play," Patrick said. "I know. You know more than that, though." Caleb looked at him. "Why do you say that?" "Because you watched her walk in like you were reading a book," Patrick said. "What's the book?" Caleb poured himself a cup and said nothing for a moment. The city moved around them. "There's a holding company called Bridgefield Partners," he said. "The Meridian vehicle." "I know who runs it." Patrick waited. "His name is David Marsh," Caleb said. He's my brother. It was not the case that Sloane Whitfield was a cruel person. Caleb had understood this for some time, in the way you could understand something without it changing how the thing felt. She was a person who had learned, at a critical and foundational period of her life, that softness was a liability. This was not an unusual lesson. Millions of people learned it. What was specific to Sloane, what Caleb had pieced together from fragments over 2.5 years of patient observation, was the particular violence with which she had had to learn it, and the completeness with which she had internalized it. The woman in the Providence photograph had been soft. She had been smiling with the unguarded quality of someone who had not yet been forced to choose between feeling things and surviving them. Whatever had happened between that photograph and now had required her to make that choice. And she had made it decisively, and apparently without regret, and she had built something extraordinary on the foundation of that decision. The problem, the thing that made Caleb's quiet documenting of the 31 incidents feel less like curiosity and more like something he had not yet named, was that the softness was still there. He saw it in very specific moments. He saw it when she spoke to Marcus, the building's elderly doorman, and her voice dropped a register, and she asked after his granddaughter by name. He saw it in the way she looked at Nora, when Nora was at the cart, with a brief flash of something not sentimentality exactly, more like recognition before her expression reorganized itself. He saw it most clearly in December, in the 10 days following the morning she had bought the coffee. She kept buying coffee, not every day, that would have been too abrupt a change for someone who moved the way she moved, through the world with every gesture accounted for. But 3 days a week, sometimes 4, she stopped at the cart. She never lingered. She never made small talk, but she stopped, and she paid, and twice she said something that was not unkind once. This is actually better than upstairs, which from her was the approximate equivalent of a standing ovation, and once, on a morning when the temperature had dropped to 4 degrees and Caleb had shown up anyway. "You don't have to be here, you know. The analysts need coffee," he had said. She had looked at him for a moment with that unclassifiable expression. "I suppose they do," she had said, and gone inside. Nora, who had been there that morning, had said, "I think she's trying." "Don't anthropomorphize yet," Caleb had said. "What's anthropomorphize?" "It means deciding someone is a certain way before you have enough information." Nora had thought about this. "But I have information," she said. She said, "You didn't have to be here." That's information. Caleb had looked at his daughter, who was wearing her red coat and her hat with the pom-pom, and the expression of someone who had been thinking carefully about something and had arrived at a conclusion she found satisfying. "You're going to be very difficult when you're older," he said. "I'm very difficult now," Nora said. "You just handle it better than some people." The Hargrove Capital annual winter gathering was not called a party. It was called a year-end strategy reflection, which was a name chosen, Caleb suspected, by someone who had wanted to have a party and had needed to justify it to a CFO with strong opinions about discretionary spending. It took place on December 19th in the building's ground floor atrium, which was technically a public space, which meant that Caleb's cart, positioned each morning at the southeast corner of the atrium entrance, was, technically, within sight of the gathering. He had not been invited. This was not a source of distress. He had not expected to be invited. What he had not expected was for David to call at 7:10 that morning. His brother's voice on the phone was the same as it always was, precise, warm in the specific way of someone who genuinely liked people and had the patience to understand them, and carrying, always, the particular quality of a man who had thought 3 moves ahead of the current conversation. "You're not going to want to hear this," David said. "Then say it quickly. The Hargrove position is not mine." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Around him, the atrium was filling with early arrivals for the gathering. Women in velvet and men in dark suits. Analysts clutching champagne flutes with the careful posture of people who were aware they were being watched. "Whose is it?" he said. "A client of mine. I'm managing the vehicle, but the strategic decision belongs to someone else. Someone who has been acquiring quietly for 14 months, and who has very specific reasons for the target." A pause. "They want a meeting with Whitfield." "Who is it?" "I can't tell you that yet," David said. "But Caleb, when it comes out, I need you to understand that I didn't know about the personal dimension when I took the engagement. The personal dimension. Caleb stood very still in the cold. Tell me, he said. David told him. Caleb stood in the cold for a long time after the call ended. Around him, through the glass walls of the atrium, the year-end strategy reflection was decorating itself with fairy lights and catered hors d'oeuvre. Music had started something instrumental and ambient that was trying very hard to be neutral. He thought about the Providence shelter. He thought about the photograph. He thought about Victoria Sloan, 27 years old, in donated clothes, holding up a children's coat and smiling like a person who still had things to smile about. He thought about what David had told him about the person behind the meridian position and what that person wanted and why. He put his phone away. He started packing down the cart. Marcus, the doorman, watched him from the entrance. Leaving early? Change of plans, Caleb said. Gathering started inside, Marcus said. Open atrium tonight. You could come in if you wanted. Caleb looked at the glass doors. Inside, under the warm yellow light, he could see Sloan standing at the center of the room, with a glass in her hand, and the expression of a general inspecting terrain, reading the room the way she read everything, with the complete, exhausting attention of someone who had learned that the cost of not paying attention was high. She looked confident. She looked formidable. She looked, he thought, like someone who did not know that the floor was about to give way. Not yet, he said. He went and got food from Patrick's cart 2 blocks north. He stood in the cold and ate, and thought about what David had told him with the systematic thoroughness he had never quite stopped applying to things that mattered. David had told him that Gloria Reyes, his client, the person behind Meridian and the 14-month acquisition, had built a logistics company out of a single van and a willingness to work hours that most people found theoretical. She had started it in Providence, 6 years after leaving the shelter, with $10,000 she had borrowed from a credit union and a business plan she had written in longhand at the kitchen table while her daughter slept. The daughter was now at community college, studying accounting. The company employed 41 people. She had been looking for Sloan Whitfield for Victoria Sloan for 3 years, David said. She had found her. She had not known how to approach her directly, because the woman she was looking for had become someone whose assistants had assistants. She had eventually decided that the only language Sloan would take seriously was a financial one. So she had learned that language. She had acquired a position large enough to require attention. She had been asking, quietly and formally through the correct channels, for a conversation. What David had not known, when he accepted the engagement, was that the personal dimension existed. He had discovered it last week, when Gloria had finally explained the full context and had called Caleb immediately, because David Marsh knew his brother. He knew that Caleb had been standing outside that building for 3 years. He knew why Caleb had moved to New York, and the coffee cart, and the corner of 5th and Hargrove, and the specific building Caleb stood in front of every morning. He had known for 2 years. He had never said anything. Neither of us is very good at announcing things, David had said on the phone. Neither of us is, Caleb had agreed. He finished his food in the cold. He looked back at the atrium lights. He went to get his jacket from the cart. It was Marcus who let him in. At 9:47, when the gathering had thinned to the inner circle, 12 or 15 people clustered near the bar. The rest dispersed upstairs or into the city. Caleb had changed into the jacket he kept in the cart for the rare occasions, when he had somewhere to be at the end of a day. It was a good jacket, charcoal wool, bought 3 years ago, and still well cut enough to read correctly in a room like this. He was under no illusion that it made him look like he belonged. He was under no illusion about what he looked like, generally, to the people in this room. He found her near the east wall, looking at a piece of art that appeared to be 2 rectangles of navy blue paint with a thin white line between them. She was alone. Her glass was still in her hand, but had not been sipped recently. "That looks like a Rothko," he said. She turned, and the thing that happened in her face when she saw him was remarkable, not surprise exactly, or not only, something recognitional, something that moved through the surprise and settled into a different quality of stillness. "It isn't," she said. "It's a copy. Good one, but still." How can you tell? The white line, she said. In the original, it breathes. This one is just paint. She looked at him. You shouldn't be in here. I know. Marcus let you in. He did. She looked back at the painting. He's been doing things like that since the building was built, she said. He once let a man sleep in the lobby for 3 hours because the man had a sick dog, and it was 30 below, and there was a vet a block away, and he was waiting for the vet to open. She paused. I found out and told him not to do it again. He did it again the following January. What did you do? Gave him a raise, she said, with the precise, minimal tone of someone admitting to a feeling they had not planned on having. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something, he said. She looked at him then full on. The complete attention she usually distributed laterally across a room brought to bear on a single point. He felt it the way you felt a spotlight. You can tell me, she said. Someone has been accumulating a significant position in Hargrove for 14 months, he said. My brother manages the vehicle. He called me this morning. He told me the person behind it is named Gloria Reyes. Something moved through her face. She was at the Providence shelter, Caleb said, the same time you were. Her daughter was 8 years old, and she had pneumonia, and the shelter worked very hard to get them housing before the city's winter emergency protocols kicked in. Your advocacy for the family, your fundraising, your time was significant. According to my brother, who has been told this by Miss Reyes directly, you sat with her daughter for 4 nights while the child recovered. Sloane Whitfield was very still. She built a company, Caleb said. A good one. It took 11 years. When she had enough capital, she began looking for an investment that would be meaningful rather than simply profitable. He paused. She chose Hargrove because she believed in what you'd built. She wants a partnership, not a takeover. My brother says she has been trying to request a meeting through formal channels for 8 months and has been declined at the assistant level every time. The room continued its ambient noise around them. Someone laughed near the bar. The string quartet, which had appeared at some point in the last hour, played something low and steady. Sloane set her glass down on the ledge beside the painting. She did not speak for a long time. You know who I was, she said. It was not a question. I volunteered at Providence during my last year of business school, he said. I saw your photograph in the common room. The coat drive. Yes, she exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it was the sound of something that had been held carefully for a very long time. And, you've been standing in front of my building for 3 years, she said. Yes. Knowing. Yes. She looked at him. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't mine to say, he said. And because I was watching what you were building. I wanted to see what it would be. And? The word came out with a careful neutrality that he recognized as something other than indifference. I think it's extraordinary, he said, and I think it cost you things it shouldn't have had to cost. They stood there for a moment, with the noise of the room moving around them, and the copy Rothko watching from the wall, and the particular quality of silence that descends when two people have said something true to each other that cannot be unsaid. Sloane Whitfield looked like someone who had been handed a piece of information and was doing the thing she did with all information, assembling it, placing it in context, working out the structural implications. But her face, beneath the assembly, was doing something different. Her face was doing the thing she had spent 14 years training it not to do. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. The first morning I said something to you about the cafe upstairs. I was not having a hard morning. She paused. I knew exactly what I was doing. I do it automatically. With certain kinds of situations. Certain kinds of reminders. She looked at the painting. You reminded me of something I didn't want to be reminded of. That was not your fault, and it was not your problem, and I made it your problem anyway. Caleb was quiet. 31 times, give or take, he said. She looked at him sharply. I counted, he said, not for any particular reason, just a habit. Something crossed her face, the preliminary motion of something that might have been in another context. And was perhaps here too, the beginning of a laugh. It did not fully arrive, but it was present at the edges. "I'm sorry," she said. "For all of them." "I know," he said. "That's not a given," she said. "I could be saying it strategically." "You could be," he agreed. "But you're not." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Your knuckles are white again," he said. "You only do that when you're holding something you don't want to drop." She looked at her own hands, then at him, with an expression he had not seen on her face before, open, in a way that was not tactical, not curated, simply open, the way a window is open when someone has pushed it up because they need air. "I need to call Gloria Reyes," she said. "You do? Tonight?" "Probably." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been declining meeting requests from Bridgefield for 8 months." "I know. I assumed it was hostile." "I had my reasons." "Yes. I didn't ask enough questions," she said, and the weight she put on this was not self-flagellation, it was the tone of a person making an accurate assessment of a decision and cataloging it correctly. "Nobody does," Caleb said, "with things that look familiar." She picked up her glass, set it down again, looked at the painting. "The Rothko breathes," she said, "because the edges of the color zones are not hard. He built them up in thin layers. When you stand back far enough, the line between the colors seems to shift, warm, then cool, then warm again. It looks like it's alive." She paused. "I spent a lot of time in art museums when I was 24 and couldn't afford anything else. Free on Thursdays." "Providence Museum of Art," he said. "How did you know?" "It's the closest one to the shelter." She turned to look at him fully. There was a quality in her expression, not softness exactly, not yet, but the structural beginning of softness, the way a landscape looks just before the light changes. "Who are you really, Caleb Marsh?" she said. "Someone who makes coffee on a corner," he said. "Former product director." "Father." "Person who learned that the things worth building are usually the ones you didn't plan on." She was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter," she said. "She comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "She does. She watches everything," Sloane said. "The way you do. She's better at it than I am." A silence. The string quartet shifted into something slower. "I want to meet with Gloria Reyes," Sloane said. "Properly. On her terms." She paused. "Will your brother arrange it?" "Yes." "And you," she said. "You'll be at the corner tomorrow morning." It was not quite a question. 6:47, he said. "Same as always." The meeting between Sloane Whitfield and Gloria Reyes took place on December 22nd, in a conference room on the 34th floor. It lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. Caleb knew this, because David texted him afterward, with a single line. 3 hours 20. She cried. "Good cry." "Deal," he texted back. "Good." He was at the cart the next morning, the morning after. The building ran a reduced schedule on the 23rd, and on the 24th it closed, and Caleb took the cart home for the first time in 3 years, loaded it onto the small trailer he had bought for exactly this purpose, and had used only once because the cold had gotten to the calibration of one of the urns, and a machine he relied on for income was not something he could leave, at risk. Standing in Denise's small kitchen on Christmas Eve, drinking tea while Nora slept in the back room, he thought about the things that had happened in the last 10 days, with the same methodical care he brought to everything. He had carried information about Sloane Whitfield's past for 2.5 years. He had shared it, in full, with a woman who had built an armor out of the distance between her past and her present. He had watched the armor come off in increments, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the specific, incremental way of a person removing something they had worn so long, they had forgotten it was separate from their skin. He thought about what it cost people to be accurately seen. He thought about Rachel, who had seen him accurately from the beginning, and had never once used it against him, which he had understood, in his 20s, as simply how love worked, and which he understood now, older, as something rarer and more specific than that. He thought about Nora's anglerfish, and the light that was part of the creature itself. He thought about what grew from the place where pain had been, when you gave it the right conditions. He did not call Sloane. She had not called him. This seemed correct. There were things that needed to settle before they could be handled. And both of them, he thought, were people who understood this in their different ways. He did not hear from Sloane that day or the next. which was Christmas Eve, when the building was closed and the corner of 5th and Hargrove was quiet, in the way that Midtown became quiet on holidays. Not peaceful exactly, but resting. The mechanical hum of the city dropped down to something closer to a human register. He spent Christmas with Nora and Denise, at Denise's apartment in the West Village, where they ate the specific combination of foods that had become their tradition since Rachel died: tamales from the place on Bleecker, pie from the bakery on Hudson, and the particular battered edition of A Child's Christmas in Wales that Rachel had read to Nora from before Nora was old enough to understand any of it. He thought about Sloane once, briefly, and then allowed himself not to. She appeared at the cart on December 26th. She was not in her cashmere coat. She was in a dark puffer jacket, and her hair was down, which he had not seen before, and she was wearing glasses wire-framed, the kind that suggested a person who had chosen to stop hiding a small thing they found slightly inconvenient about themselves. She looked, he thought, like a person taking a day off. "Large dark roast," she said. "No sugar," he said. "Yes, actually," she said. "A little." He looked at her. She looked back. And there was something in the exchange unspoken, specific, in the grammar of two people who have said important things to each other and are now finding out what the days that come after those things look like. He added the sugar. He handed her the cup. She did not leave immediately. She stood at the cart in the December 26th quiet, with both hands around her coffee, watching the street with the particular absence of agenda of someone who has, temporarily, set down the project of being themselves. "Gloria Reyes wants to fund an expansion of the winter shelter program," she said. Using a portion of the Meridian position proceeds. Regardless of final deal structure, she asked if Hargrove would administer the philanthropy side. "What did you say?" "I said yes," she said. "Immediately," which was probably a tell, but I said yes. "It's a good tell," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Providence," she said. "Not what I felt about it then, but what I took from it. I thought I took precision, efficiency, the specific knowledge that resources are not guaranteed, and people who treat them as infinite are lying to themselves." She looked at her coffee. "That's true. I did take that, but I also took something else that I didn't acknowledge, which was that the people who were kind to me during that period, not the administrators, not the intake process, but the people who were simply kind, changed the quality of what was possible for me afterward, in ways I can't calculate." She paused. "I don't know how to do that. I lost the ability somewhere." "You give Marcus raises," Caleb said. She looked at him. "That doesn't count. It counts more than you think. You're very charitable," she said. "Given everything. I'm very tired," he said. "Charity is easier than the alternative." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What is the alternative?" "Carrying the 31, he said. I put it down." She looked at him for a long time. The snow had stopped. The street was very quiet. Behind her, the glass building rose up into the cold blue sky of a December morning, all its floors lit, carrying all its particular weight. "Nora's here on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said. "She is. I'd like to apologize to her," Sloane said. If that's appropriate, Caleb thought about his daughter, her careful watching, her precision, her opinion that Sloane was trying. He thought about what it cost a person to say, "I'd like to apologize to a 7-year-old. The specific humility of acknowledging that a child had witnessed something worth accounting for. "I'll ask her," he said. "She has opinions about these things." "Of course she does," Sloane said. And that motion he had observed before the preliminary arrival of something that might be a laugh completed itself this time. It was brief, low, almost surprised sounding. The laugh of someone who had not expected to laugh and found the experience slightly disorienting and was willing, this once, to allow it. On the following Tuesday, Nora arrived at the cart at 3:55, in her red coat and her hat with the pom-pom, and with her backpack and her library book about deep-sea fish, and the expression of someone who had been briefed by her father and had decided to approach the situation empirically. Sloane Whitfield came out of the building at 4 o'clock, which was not her normal departure time, and which Caleb suspected had been arranged with the specific deliberateness of someone who did not do things accidentally. She crossed to the cart. She looked at Nora. "Hello," she said. "Hello," Nora said, with the neutral openness of a scientist initiating an experiment. "I owe you an apology," Sloane said. "I wasn't kind to your father on some occasions when you were here. That wasn't fair, and you didn't deserve to see it." Nora considered this. "Did you apologize to him?" she asked. "I did." "Good," Nora said. "He needed to hear it more than I did." She looked at Sloane with the precise directness of someone who has decided to say the next thing clearly. "He thinks you're building something important." Sloane was briefly still. She looked at Caleb with an expression he could not entirely read but which contained, he thought, both the thing she had been before Providence and the thing she had become since, held briefly in the same frame. "What kind of fish is that?" Sloane asked, nodding at the library book. Nora held it up. "Anglerfish," she said. "The light is part of them. It grows from their forehead. They use it to see in the dark and to attract things." "Useful," Sloane said. "Also terrifying," Nora said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Sloane said. Nora considered her with renewed interest. "No," she agreed. "They're really not." Winter came back hard in January the way it always did. Not the first beautiful snow of December, but the gray, grinding cold of a city past its seasonal novelty, the kind of cold that does not pretend to be picturesque. The kind that simply is. Caleb was at the cart at 6:47. He was always at the cart at 6:47. The analysts came. The building filled. The city moved with its customary mechanical patience through a morning that was 3 degrees and overcast with the specific flat light of a January sky that has decided against clarity. At 7:18, Sloane came down the block. She walked the same as she always had, the forward certainty, the coat, the particular quality of her arrival that parted the crowd without effort. But there was something different, and Caleb, who had been watching her for 2.5 years, knew immediately what it was. She was not looking straight ahead. She was looking at him. She reached the cart. She stopped. The cold settled around them both. "Large dark roast," she said. "Half a sugar." "Negotiating," he said. "Always," she said. He poured. He handed it across. This time their fingers did meet, briefly, at the transfer, his warm from the urns, hers cold from the walk, and she did not pull back immediately. Neither did he. "The Reyes partnership closes next week," she said. David mentioned. "The shelter program expansion starts in February." She looked at the cup. "I've been meeting with the program director, understanding the gaps. The things that would have helped." She paused. "The things that would have helped me, specifically." He looked at her. She looked at him. "That's hard work," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." The morning moved around them. A cab honked. Snow, very fine, was beginning again at the edges of the sky. Marcus pulled the building door open for a group of arrivals and caught Caleb's eye, and did not quite smile, because Marcus was a man of discretion, but achieved the expression of a man who has been observing a situation with patience and finds the current development satisfactory. "Nora told me something," Sloane said. "She tells everyone things," Caleb said. "She told me that the anglerfish creates its own light, and then uses the light to move through the dark. She said the interesting thing is that it doesn't produce the light for its own benefit. It produces it to draw other things close, and then the other things and the light all become part of the same situation." She looked at him with the careful directness she had been practicing, that was getting easier each time. "She's 7 years old. She's been reading about deep-sea fish for a month," he said. "There's a whole ecosystem of metaphors in there." "I know," Sloane said. "She knows exactly what she's doing." A pause. The snow came down, fine and steady, without the drama of December. Just snow, just the city, cold and functional and moving forward in the way it always moved, carrying all its weight and light. "There's a thing I want to ask you," Sloane said. "And I want to ask it plainly. Because I've spent enough years not asking things plainly." "All right," he said. "There's a board dinner next Friday. For the partnership signing. Gloria Reyes will be there. and David, and several people from both organizations. She held the cup in both hands. I would like you to be there, not as a favor, not as a gesture, because you are actually part of how this happened, and because I would like you there. The city moved around them. Somewhere a train moved underground. The glass building rose up behind her, all its floors carrying their ordinary, extraordinary weight of work and ambition, and the things people built when they were afraid, and the things they built when they stopped being afraid. I'll need to arrange something for Nora, he said. I've already spoken to Denise, Sloane said. She said, and I'm quoting directly, that it was about time. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the full attention she had been practicing directing at exactly one person at a time. Half a sugar, he said. Half a sugar, she agreed. Next time you can negotiate to a full one. I know my end game, she said, and the smile, not the preliminary motion, not the suggestion of it, but the actual full-arrived thing happened entirely, briefly, in the cold January morning air between them. She went inside. He stood in the cold, which was cold the way it had always been. Factual and specific, and exactly what it was. The snow came down. The city moved. He thought about Rachel. The way he allowed himself to think about her now, not with the suffocating weight of loss, but with the particular quality of love that has survived its worst circumstances and is still, on the other side of them, recognizably itself. He thought she would have found this funny. He thought she would have found Sloane Whitfield fascinating and frightening in equal measure, and would have made several observations about Caleb's patience that would have been pointed and accurate and delivered with the precise affection of someone who knew exactly whom they were talking. 2. He thought she would have liked Nora's anglerfish metaphor. He poured himself a coffee, which he did not often do. Dark roast, no sugar. He stood in the cold and drank it and watched the city, which was full of people building things they had not planned on, making light in whatever way they had available, moving through the dark toward each other, in the particular, ordinary, extraordinary way that people always had and would. The snow kept coming. It was not nothing, he thought. It was, in fact, exactly enough.